Hello and welcome to a special episode of To The Point. We in India don't really have a tradition of writing political autobiographies, but a book published tomorrow is astonishingly honest and revealing. It's called Courage and Commitment, and here it is, and the book lives up to its title in every sense of the word. Its author is the former minister in Rajiv Gandhi and Nararasimha Rao's governments, as well as the former General Secretary of the Congress under Sonia Gandhi. Her name is Margaret Alva, and this is her first interview about her book. Mrs. Alva, let's start at the end of your political career before we come to the beginning, because it ended so dramatically. In 2008, when you were General Secretary of the Congress Party and the party was choosing candidates for the forthcoming Karnataka elections, you wanted your son Nivedith to get a ticket, but he didn't get one. I gather that was the third time that he had successively lost out. And you write in your book, while sons and daughters of many leaders in Karnataka and other states had been accommodated, Nivedith had been deliberately left out in a bid to sideline me. This hurt you deeply, didn't it?
It did. I must also mention here, which I have said, is that against his name, the only qualification printed in the paper was Margaret Alva's son, as if he had done nothing else. Anyway, he lost out, but that was not the only thing.
In fact, by writing Margaret Alva's son as his only qualification, they sort of underlined the fact that he wasn't getting it because he was your son.
That's right. That was the point.
So deep was the pain and the emotion swirling inside you that you uncharacteristically made an outburst in front of the media. You said, and I'm quoting, "Different rules exist for different people. That is how we lost Karnataka. We have got complaints that tickets were sold at the local level. As for sons and daughters, Jafar Sharif's grandson and my son are not smugglers or terrorists. Why were they kept out?" That outburst ended your career. Today, how do you look back on it?
One thing I want to clarify is that I didn't go to the media. There was a journalist who was close to the family, whom I trusted, who walked into my sitting room uncalled for and just brought a list of sons and daughters to whom tickets had been given and said, how do you react to this? I mean, I never thought that he had come there to gain his career sort of brownie points.
You trusted him that this was in confidence.
Exactly. I trusted him. And I said, well, this has happened. So many children have got, but Jafar Sharif and my son have been. I just mentioned it. And I did say that tickets were sold at the local level, and that's how we lost. And that's a fact. I had proof. People had written and given it to me.
So in a sense, you walked into a trap which you didn't know was waiting for you.
That's right. I didn't go into the media as you suggested, but they came. He came rather.
So it was an accident that ended your career.
I didn't mean to go to the press, Karan. But having said what I did, I stood by it and I still stand by it because what I said that day was true.
So when you look back on it, do you regret it, or do you say it was the truth, but maybe I shouldn't have said it publicly?
Yeah, maybe I should not have said it publicly, but I trusted the person when I spoke. And, well, I paid the price. I was prepared to.
Now, in your book, you describe in detail the meeting that followed with Sonia Gandhi, where she asked for your resignation. A.K. Antony was also present, although he was by no means helpful. You write about that in great detail in the book. Give me a summary of that meeting.
Well, Antony rang me up and said he wanted to see me. He had been put in charge of looking into the whole affair. So I went to his house, we met, and he says, don't worry, we'll sort it out, and gave me a great assurance. And then he said, Madam wants to meet you. So I got up to go and he accompanied me. I said, are you coming also? He said, yes. He came there. And well, as I walked in, I saw a grave looking Sonia ji sitting there. So I said, I feel like a schoolgirl summoned by the headmistress. So she smiled, she made me sit. And the usual thing, why did you say during elections, Margaret, you're supposed to be close to me. And, it has upset people and it has upset everyone around and so on and so forth. So I told her, I said, ma'am, if I have embarrassed you or you're upset, I will step down. You brought me to the ICC. I'm grateful for that. I've done the best I could. But I will not stay if I have embarrassed you. I'll go home and send you my letter. And I will put it all down. So Anthony said, no, 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 please don't write anything to upset the leader. So I told him straight. I said, Mr. Anthony, you have no place in my relationship with Sonia ji. You stay out of it. And then Sonia ji held my hand and said, calm down, don't get upset. And then I left. And that night, I wrote the letter, which for the first time today, I have published in the book.
I'll come to the letter in a moment's time. But when you offered your resignation, Sonia Gandhi accepted it immediately. She didn't demur. She didn't try to discourage you.
No, I said, I'm stepping down. I'll send you my letter. She said, I'll bring you back. Don't worry. But pressure on me is too much at the moment.
Now, in your book, you suggest that, in fact, one explanation for Mr. Anthony's unhelpful behavior at that meeting is that actually he was taking revenge for the fact that earlier, as General Secretary of Congress, you had played a critical role in having him replaced by Oommen Chandy in Kerala. This was his revenge.
Could be, but I didn't take the decision, Karan. After the disaster in Kerala, where we lost every single Congress seat to Parliament when he was Chief Minister, Bhatia and I, R.L. Bhatia and I were sent as observers to meet people. We met every single MLA, we met the leaders for 2 days, every single person, and we gave a report saying that people feel that a change of leadership is inevitable. On that report, Sonia ji said for immediate follow-up, and 3 of us were sent, not me alone, Pranab Mukherjee, Ahmed Patel and me. And it is there that the CLP was called, the new leader was elected, and Oommen Chandy became chairman.
But
became Chief Minister.
But Anthony held this against you.
He held it against me. He thought that I had sort of instigated the whole thing, which is not true.
Do you think
he got the better of me?
He got the better of you. Do you think he instigated Mrs. Gandhi to remove you? Did he encourage her, persuade her, push her?
I was told by people close, in the close circle, because I have friends there, who said that in fact he had recommended my expulsion. But everybody that Mrs. Gandhi consulted said no. She has such a long record of service for the party and an impeccable record. It would be wrong to expel her. Everybody overruled it.
Now, in the resignation letter you sent Mrs. Gandhi, dated 11th November 2008, which you have for the first time published in your book, you write, and I'm quoting, "The manner in which the change of PCC presidents was affected in the states under my charge hurt me. My opinion was neither sought, nor was I part of any discussion process before resignations were taken. Pros and cons were not weighed collectively." That's a striking comment on how the Congress functions. It seems arbitrary and ad hoc.
It's always been, this has been the process of decision making in the party all along, in the sense that we are a centralized party. Decision makings are very centralized. There isn't sort of that decentralized kind of functioning, one. Secondly, it's not something new. It's been happening all along, right? But to me, I was very hurt because I had put my heart and soul into my work. And all I needed or expected was a little bit of consultation or informing that this is what we wish to do.
And you were General Secretary after all.
In charge of those states.
And it still didn't happen.
No, I was in charge of 8 states. I spent the best time of my life during those years, serving the party.
And yet you weren't consulted on critical decisions, and you were General Secretary, not an ordinary person.
But this keeps happening in all the parties. Do you think it doesn't happen in other parties? It's happening everywhere.
You have 3 very striking examples in your book of the arbitrary ad hoc way in which Congress makes appointments to critical positions. The first was after the 2004 elections in Maharashtra. You were General Secretary in charge of the state. Sushil Kumar Shinde was the sitting Chief Minister. And this is what you write in your book. To our shock and dismay, the name of Vilas Rao Deshmukh was announced as Chief Minister. Shinde, Rao, the PCC President, and I had not been consulted or even informed.
That's right.
It literally happened behind your back.
2 observers were sent. We were in Bombay, and the observers claimed they had met the MLAs. And this was the opinion, which we knew was not, because we also knew what the opinion of the MLAs was.
So it was being engineered to suit someone's personal decision.
Yeah, it was decided, and so this was the way in which it was announced.
And the General Secretary, the sitting Chief Minister and the PCC Chief were neither consulted nor informed.
No.
There's a second example in your book, which in some ways is even worse, about how Congress arbitrarily comes to critical decisions about appointments. It's about how Sushil Kumar Shinde was appointed Governor of Andhra Pradesh. You write, he had not been asked, but simply informed. And proof of that is with you. He was sitting in your home having tea in Delhi when he got told he'd been appointed governor.
That's true.
So the man wasn't asked whether he wanted the job.
No, I think informally Mrs. Gandhi had said, well, I'll send you to some good post. You can go as governor, and she then took the decision. She doesn't take the decision. She recommended it to the Prime Minister. Same thing happened in my case.
Absolutely. In fact, in your case, it's Mrs. Gandhi who took the decision, because this is the third example of the arbitrary ad hoc way in which Congress appoints people to critical posts. In your case, when you were appointed governor after you resigned as General Secretary, it happened one afternoon when you were asleep. You got a phone call from Sonia Gandhi, and you write, before I could reply or refuse, the phone call ended. In other words, she literally told you, Margaret, you're going to Uttarakhand as governor, and put the phone down.
She didn't tell me I was going to Uttarakhand. She told me, Margaret, I've recommended your name for a governorship.
And the phone went dead.
Phone went dead. I didn't want to leave Delhi. I sort of wanted to say, ma'am, why? But I didn't get an appointment after that either.
And no chance to talk on the phone either.
No.
So it was a 30-second conversation to tell you you're being appointed a governor and nothing more.
No. And then Chidambaram rang me up, of course. He was Home Minister.
This particular story also proves that critical decisions like appointing governors were taken by Sonia Gandhi, not Dr. Manmohan Singh.
That's not true. She recommends, I think every party, in every party this happens, Karan, that the party recommends people for certain positions.
And you would say that Dr. Manmohan Singh could have turned the recommendation down?
He could have. He could have preferred to make me an MP and make me a minister if he wanted to.
Which he didn't.
Which he said very often that he would have liked to do. But the question is, it is for the Prime Minister to take the final decision.
The Prime Minister, as Prime Minister, many times said he would like to make you a minister or an MP.
But I was a defeated MP, I was not in Parliament.
Manish Shankar Iyer was a defeated MP who was specially brought back to the Rajya Sabha in a category where perhaps he wasn't even qualified to come. So let's leave that aside.
He was a writer. He came in the writer's category. I was not a writer.
But the Prime Minister's desire to bring you back, which he expressed to you many times, was the desire he couldn't fulfill. Someone stopped him, I presume.
No, not necessarily. Probably didn't push enough.
Okay. Let's move on. Your book is, in fact, a delightful collection of riveting stories. I want to take you through one or two of them. Right at the beginning of your career in October 1974, when you became Joint Secretary of the Congress, you say that a young Malayali who you said was wearing tight trousers, who could barely speak Hindi, whose typing wasn't very good, and who had no shorthand at all, was appointed your personal assistant. It turned out to be V. George.
Yes. He came rather hesitantly. I was also a little hesitant. But Karan, he happened to be a hardworking and a very committed person. But what was most important, that he learned so fast. And it is his capacity to work and to absorb that finally took him up the ladder.
And made him a very important man in Indian politics at the heart of number 10 Janpath.
You're right. The point was that when we lost the government in 77, Mrs. Gandhi, all her staff left, Prime Minister's office. She had to choose people from the AICC. And she's supposed to have said, send me Margaret's PA. He'll at least write correct English. And so George went to the tent office outside Mrs. Gandhi's house when she moved
Wellington Crescent.
To Wellington Crescent. That's
so
right.
The training with you provided V. George the background from which to climb up the political ladder, and now he sits virtually at Sonia Gandhi's right hand.
Yeah. I mean, if you have the capacity and if you can work the way he did, you're bound to be a success.
Now, when the emergency happened in 1975, you were a Congress MP, you were also Joint Secretary of the party, and yet PC Sethi, the Minister of Chemicals and Fertilizers, threatened to have your husband Niranjan arrested, and it was so serious a threat that you had to actually go to Mrs. Gandhi, who was Prime Minister, to seek her help. This is clearly an example of the high-handed, almost autocratic manner in which ministers operated during the emergency.
It's true, but it also shows that when Mrs. Gandhi came to know of such acts by her ministers or by others, she never hesitated to act and ensure justice to those who were affected.
Except that could only happen when Mrs. Gandhi found out there must have been multiple instances, probably the majority, where Mrs. Gandhi didn't find out and ministers high-handedly did awful things, and there wasn't a Mrs. Gandhi to help the victim.
That's true, because that's why we paid the price in the 77 election, because a lot of things happened without correction or without an apology, because they didn't know they were happening.
In this instance, PC Sethi's attempt to have your husband Niranjan arrested came to nothing, and PC Sethi himself ended up losing his portfolio.
You're right. That very evening, the radio announced that he had been made minister without portfolio. It showed that Mrs. Gandhi was therefore prepared to act when there was genuine injustice.
It also shows that there were some very nasty, tough, autocratic, high-handed ministers in her government who, if Mrs. Gandhi hadn't been there to step in, could have done a lot of damage.
The general impression was that Sethi had a slight problem at that time. He was not quite well and normal. He was just acting by whims.
But he was still a cabinet minister despite that. You also in your books talk about another aspect of the emergency, and here you shed particularly new and revealing light. Up till now, people like R.K. Dhawan have repeatedly insisted that Mrs. Gandhi, Indira Gandhi, had no idea of the horrible atrocities committed at Turkman Gate. Your book proves that's simply not true. You visited Turkman Gate yourself, you were shaken by what you saw, you returned in tears. You then sought an appointment with Indira Gandhi and you told her everything. So the first thing is, Mrs. Gandhi knew what was happening. She had the full story of Turkman Gate. People can't say she was unaware.
I told her the truth and she listened. But she did say, Margaret, unfortunately, she said, I called a meeting of all the local MLAs and MPs. Not one spoke. I don't know why they don't speak out. You have come with this information now. I wish I could go there, but security has stopped me from going.
But the main point I'm underlining is once you told her the full story, she knew the truth of Turkman Gate. No longer can people say she was unaware.
No. She came to know about it, and I think, in fact, when I walked into her office, she looked over her glasses and said, you've been meddling in Old Delhi, haven't you? So, you know, the IB had already told her that I had landed there with the local MP. But I said, ma'am, I went because I felt I should. She says, do you know there's a curfew there? I said, yes. But Subhadra Joshi and I had passes, so we went.
But there's something even more interesting. It's not just that she had been tipped off by the IB. It's not just that she seemed by her first opening remarks to object to what she called meddling. It's actually the answer she gave you when you told her the full story about Turkman Gate that is most revealing of all, because it's not the answer you expected. She said, and I'm quoting, some hard decisions have to be taken sometimes, otherwise nothing can change. And then she asked, right. That answer suggests not only had she accepted what was happening, there's a real sense in which she was justifying it.
Karan, the whole idea was to relocate people from there. Because, you know, there were those narrow streets and
but
all.
Look at how
but there is a way of doing it. That's all I said.
And
because you can give them better housing, you can give them better colonies, but you can't just bulldoze houses.
But the way of doing it didn't deter Mrs. Gandhi. She accepted this bulldozing.
No, she may not have known till I told her that their houses had been bulldozed, that people had died.
And then it was too late to do anything because
the press was not able to report anything.
That was also because of her.
Yeah, I don't know.
Years later, when Nararasimha Rao was Prime Minister and you were part of his government, you personally witnessed the fraught and steadily deteriorating relations between Nararasimha Rao and Sonia Gandhi. You write, She seemed unable to trust him. The Prime Minister, on his part, had always been unnerved by her aloofness. Tell me briefly about that difficult relationship.
Well, I don't know. Mr. Nararasimha Rao would call me sometimes on a Sunday evening and simply ask, what does the lady want? Nothing that I could say, but he wanted to know what the mood was at 10 Janpath. He was worried. He didn't want to have any sort of clash or any kind of problem with her. And when I spoke to Sonia ji, she always felt that PV Narasimha Rao, for some reason or the other, was not prepared, to deal with her like he should have. But most important of all is that I paid the price because both suspected me. And I see the other day in one of the books which has come out that PV Narasimha Rao had put the IB after me also to see where my loyalties lay.
The relationship between Narasimha Rao and Sonia Gandhi hit a particular low point when the government decided it would appeal against the Delhi High Court quashing the Bofors case. And that appeal meant that the charges against Rajiv Gandhi would be revived and reinstated. This particularly upset Sonia Gandhi, and this is what you write in your book. At this, Sonia snapped. What does the Prime Minister want to do? She asked. Send me to jail? Did she really believe that Narasimha Rao could send her to jail?
I can't say that. But she asked me because I was in charge of the CBI. I was the minister in charge, attached to the Prime Minister at that time. And I was not told, I was not consulted. And the file was dealt with directly by the PMO with the CBI director keeping me out. And that upset me also because as minister I was not even told.
So this decision to appeal against the Delhi High Court quashing of the Bofors case happened without your knowing?
Without my knowledge.
And that added to Sonia's suspicion?
Exactly.
And Sonia did believe that one way or another, Narasimha Rao did not have her best interests at heart.
Could be. I don't know.
In 2004 December, when Narasimha Rao died, there's a real sense from your book that Sonia Gandhi got her revenge. You were General Secretary and you saw how Narasimha Rao's body was treated by Congress, and Sonia by then was Congress President. This is what you write. His body was not even let into the AICC compound. Instead, the gun carriage carrying the former Prime Minister and Congress President was parked on the pavement outside the gate with chairs lined for party leaders outside the gate. It's a horrifying way of treating a former party president and prime minister.
Whatever the differences, he was the prime minister. He had been the prime minister. He had been Congress president. He had been chief minister. He had been party general secretary. And he had done a wonderful job, whatever you may say, wherever he worked, except for Babri Masjid and the mess up with it. But the question was, when a man is dead, you don't treat him that way. And I was hurt. In fact, I've always regretted not walking away on that occasion, but I didn't want to insult his body by walking away.
At the time you were General Secretary, and at that time you were very close to Mrs. Gandhi. She had personally brought you back after your defeat in the 2004 elections. Did you ever raise with her this treatment of Narasimha Rao?
I did not. I was very hurt, and I didn't discuss it with anyone, though I did say to my colleagues that this is not the way to treat a dead leader.
In fact, in your book, you mentioned that even today, although Narasimha Rao was Congress President and Prime Minister, there isn't a picture of his hanging in the AICC, although there are pictures of lesser leaders, some of whom at different times even deserted Congress.
You're right, you're right. I mentioned it, it's a fact. Unless it's there now, not when I was General Secretary.
So truly, the Gandhis have made an attempt to literally whitewash him out of history.
Not whitewash him. Who has whitewashed him? We have had enough stories, enough books, enough articles about what he did.
But he hasn't got the just treatment he deserves.
Well, most prime ministers had their cremations in Delhi, had something. His body was sent to Andhra. And, well, they said that he was a chief minister, great leader of Andhra, and he should be.
So he wasn't even in death given that honor of a burial or a cremation in Delhi.
You're right.
Mrs. Alva, let's take a break at that point. When I come back, I want to turn to some other interesting stories in your book, including Christian Michel's father, Wolfgang Michel, as well as the fact that you were perhaps personally responsible for Indira Gujral becoming Prime Minister, and a little bit about a warning that Fidel Castro gave you, which sadly Rajiv Gandhi... Welcome back. You're watching To The Point. My guest is former Congress Minister, former Congress General Secretary Margaret Alva, speaking for the first time in the first interview about her autobiography published tomorrow. And here it is. It's called Courage and Commitment. Mrs. Alva, I want to now come to something that for many people would be rivetingly interesting and politically important. As you know, the arms dealer Christian Michel has very recently been right at the very top of the news. His father, Wolfgang Michel, was widely believed to have had a long and close association with the Congress Party as well as the Gandhi family. In your book, you say that in 1980, you were given documentary proof that old Indian Patton tanks were being sold to South Africa, a country with which India at the time had no relations whatsoever. And you then discovered that at the very heart of this transaction was Wolfgang Michel, the then Minister of Defense Production, CP Singh, and you were told that this was happening at the instructions of Sanjay Gandhi. That's an amazing story.
It came out in Parliament, it's on the record. We did a lot of research. Mr. Unnikrishnan and I met some of the top army people at a secret location. They gave us documentary evidence of tanks having been loaded in Bombay and marked for Canada, but unloaded in South Africa. And we had all the proof, and I took it to Parliament, when of course Mr. CP Singh denied it all. And then what happened was absolutely shocking. I got in a sealed cover thrown into my gate a letter which had been drafted the previous night in the minister's chamber and sent to London for Michel's signature, saying I had contacted him when I was in London and had offered to call off the whole issue of raising it in Parliament for a commission. And I went to Parliament and I read out the letter. I said, this is what is happening. And of course, there was a big furor, and then it went to the Privileges Committee for misleading the House and so on. And Hidayatullah was the, Justice Hidayatullah was the Vice President. He asked for my passport, found I was not in London on those dates at all. And most of all, I realized then that there had been a phone call from Michel to me, luckily in the presence of a colleague, Mr. DP Singh, telling me that, Mrs. Alva, you've got it all wrong. I am your father-in-law's friend, and I've had long association with India. I'm not a Jew, I'm a Christian, because I'd called him a Jew. And saying that, he had got, luckily, Mr. DP Singh just told me, cut it off.
Absolutely. This whole was an attempt to stitch you up.
That's right. That's right. And then he had recorded my voice and then changed his story and said, no, I don't know when she came, but I got her message on a telephone, on my telephone machine.
The most fascinating thing about your story is that it shows that Wolfgang Michel had a close relationship with CP Singh, who was then Minister of State for Defense Production, and presumably, if the information you were given is correct, with Sanjay Gandhi.
Yeah, but Sanjay Gandhi had died by then.
But the operation,
yes,
you were told, was happening under Sanjay's instructions.
Yeah.
And Mrs. Gandhi, who was Prime Minister when found out, had the whole thing nipped in the bud very quickly.
Yeah, and she got the files locked, and of course Pranabda spoke to me and said, Margaret, don't push it further, let's find a solution.
Absolutely. She had the files locked and she got Pranabda, that's Pranab Mukherjee, to tell you, don't push it further, we'll find a solution.
That's
now this
right.
is very interesting because Christian Michel has repeatedly said that he has no connection with the Gandhi family at all.
Who says I've said that?
I'm not saying you did either, but I'm saying that if his father had this connection with Congress and possibly the Gandhi family, it's arguable that Christian Michel may have inherited those links and connections.
I am no one to say so. I don't know the relationship between them. All I'm saying is this is on record of Parliament.
Absolutely. And your
It
story...
was a debate in Parliament.
And your story raises the question, you can't answer it, but your story raises the question, did Christian Michel inherit his father's links? Your story established that Father Wolfgang had clear links to CP and Singh, possibly to Sanjay Gandhi, maybe to Indira Gandhi. Did Christian Michel inherit them or not? Christian Michel denies it, but it's possible he may have. Let's leave that aside. Your story is interesting because it raises that possibility. There's something else in your book that's absolutely fascinating. You write about your 2 meetings with Fidel Castro. On the first occasion, he literally swept you off your feet, didn't he?
Yeah. We were at a banquet which he hosted, and one of his ministers was busy with a plate full, eating, and he said, look at the way she eats, she's overweight already, and she never stops eating. And then he looked at me and said, how heavy are you? I said, we have a saying in India that you never reveal what the sari can hide. Why should I tell you? He says, oh, really? And the next minute before I realized, he had put his arms on my waist and lifted me up and put me down, in spite of my pleading, and said, now I know how much you weigh. So, that was the way he sort of dealt with people.
But he was also an extremely well-informed man, it emerges, because the second time you met him, you were a minister in Rajiv Gandhi's government at the time, you were in Mexico, and you were asked to stop in Cuba on your way back because the Cuban president wanted to meet you. He spoke to you for 2 hours, and he gave you a very prescient message for Rajiv Gandhi.
That's right.
What was the message?
He said 2 things I want you to tell your Prime Minister. He's a young man, he has a great future, and I believe he will do very well. But tell him one thing, not to digress or to move away from his mother's policies, because that will create problems for him.
And the second?
And the second, not to trust his finance minister, because he is plotting against him and he will stab him in the back. So I looked at him and said, but he is one of his closest confidants. They work together, they're both from UP. He said, no, you tell this from me. And I came and I repeated it, and of course Rajiv ji laughed and said, what does he know about India? When I spoke about VP Singh.
That was the big mistake Rajiv made, because actually Fidel Castro was right.
Yeah.
Rajiv made the mistake ignoring his warning.
And in fact, I reminded him later, when all this happened and VP Singh broke away, I said, I can convey that message to you, and you ignored it. He just smiled, he never said anything.
It was too late by then.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to end this interview because there's a third anecdote in your book which I think is delightful, and many would think it somehow encapsulates both the spirit, the joie de vivre, as well as the way we view MPs. You write about something that happened in 1976. A group of MPs went on a jaunt to Australia as part of the inaugural trip of the Emperor Akbar, a new 747 acquired by Air India. They were taken to the country's largest wine brewery. It was meant to be an educational trip. They ended up swiping the bottles. Worse still, they got filmed, and even worse, it got put on Australian television.
Listen, we were taken, Mrs. Gandhi, I was not member of the committee. Om Mehta was leading the delegation, and Mrs. Gandhi sent her aunt, Sheila, Kaul and me with the delegation, because I think she was a little worried about what would be happening there. And there was nothing wrong. We went to their oldest brewery, they took us round, everybody saw all the processes, the bottling and everything. And as you came out, on tables, 2 tables, there were bottles placed with the thing, pick your choice, So, and when they saw that they could pick up, some of them picked up more than 1. I suppose they expected us to pick up 1 each going out. They picked them up, and they were walking out not knowing that the company had invited the media people for their publicity that Indian MPs were visiting them.
And media showed Indian MPs walking out with several bottles in hand.
Yeah, with more than 1 bottle, definitely. And that evening it was on television. But the worst part was when we came back, and Mrs. Kaul and I went to Mrs. Gandhi to report on the trip, since we had both been sent to look after the thing. Before I could say anything, I said, ma'am, it went off okay. There were a few problems. Yes, like MPs walking out with bottles and being on television, isn't it? She said. After that, I stopped. I said, ma'am, you know more than I need to tell you, so there's the report. But that was You know, that trip, I could write a book on it. The things that happened, the hilarious
Including,
incidents.
and I won't bring it up, the fact that MPs were embarrassing you with the way they were eating.
That's okay. And that's why Indira ji then started for every delegation going out from the party, the AICC, that there would be a briefing on everything that they needed to know about.
In other words, they'd be taught how to eat, what to pick up,
No.
and what not to.
Subjects that they need not discuss, and so on and so forth.
I'm going to end by referring to what I said in the introduction. India doesn't have a tradition of political autobiography writing, yet yours is an astonishingly honest and revealing book. What made you do it?
Karan, I must say that it's my life story. A girl from a middle class family in a small town of Mangalore, going to school barefoot in the rain with an umbrella. From there, the whole story of how I survived, I faced challenges, I came to Delhi, and you know.
So this is Margaret Alva's full life.
Exactly. I have not written a political thesis.
But
I
have you
written
held
my story of my life and the incidents and events that I lived through, sometimes successfully, sometimes.
Have you held anything back?
Lot more things I could have written, Karan, but you know, actually, shall I tell you the truth? I do not use the computer. My entire book is handwritten, 850 pages. It had to be cut down, and we had to take a lot of things out. Maybe I'll think about a supplement sometime.
My last question. Is Sonia Gandhi aware of what you've written, or will she only discover when she reads the book?
No, I've given her a copy of the book
This morning?
today, and I told her, I said, there's nothing in the book which is not already in the public domain. Most of these things have been at one time or the other.
Will she like the frankness with which you discuss the arbitrary ad hoc appointments, which we've already discussed in this interview? Will she like that?
But Karan, this is happening in every party.
But it's not
in the
discussed.
Congress.
It's not discussed.
No,
it's not
of
made
course,
public.
everybody knows the way Mr. Modi picks or drops
But will
his ministers.
Sonia Gandhi like it?
Why should she? Why should she not? But I'll tell you something. I think the younger generation in every party is seeking transparency, consultation, and more openness. And I'm sure, and I know the Congress is also going in that direction.
Let's hope she takes it in that spirit. Mrs. Alva, a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you so much.